In the summer of 1965, in a quiet residential neighborhood in Indianapolis, Indiana, neighbors went about their lives. Children played in the street. Families sat down for dinner. And behind the closed doors of a house on East New York Street, a 16-year-old girl named Sylvia Likens was being destroyed. Not quickly, not mercifully, slowly, deliberately, over the course of nearly 3 months. What happened to Sylvia Likens has been called the single worst crime ever committed against an individual in the history of Indiana. The judge who sentenced her torturer said he had never, in all his years on the bench, encountered anything so depraved, so calculated, so utterly without justification. And yet, almost nobody knew it was happening. Not the neighbors who heard screams, not the teachers who noticed she disappeared from school, not the children who witnessed it firsthand and said nothing. This is the story of Sylvia Likens, a girl who deserved a full life, a girl who was failed by every single adult around her, and a case that would shake the American justice system to its core. Sylvia Marie Likens was born on January 3, 1949, in Lebanon, Indiana. She was the second of 5 children born to Lester and Betty Likens, a family that by any measure struggled. Lester Likens worked carnivals for a living. He and Betty traveled the circuit, setting up booths, running games, chasing the seasonal income that came with it. It was an unstable life. The family moved constantly. The children rarely stayed in one school long enough to make real friends. But by every account, Sylvia was a bright, cheerful girl. People who knew her described her as kind-hearted, a little shy, with a quiet humor and a gentle way about her. She loved music. She dreamed of normal things. High school, maybe a boyfriend someday, a life that didn't involve packing up and moving every few months. She had a sister, Jenny, who was a year younger. Jenny had polio and walked with a brace. The two girls were inseparable. They looked out for each other the way only sisters who've had a hard life together can. In the summer of 1965, Lester and Betty were preparing to follow the carnival circuit again. They couldn't take the children with them this time. They needed somewhere for at least 2 of the kids to stay. A woman named Gertrude Baniszewski offered to help. Gertrude lived nearby. She had children the same age as Sylvia and Jenny. She seemed fine, normal. A single mother doing her best. Lester agreed to pay Gertrude $20 a week to house Sylvia and Jenny while he and Betty were away. $20 a week. That's what Sylvia Likens' life was valued at. And when the first payment was late, when Lester missed just 1 week, Gertrude Baniszewski took it out on Sylvia. 3850 East New York Street was not a house of obvious horrors. From the outside, it looked like every other home on the block. A modest, single-story house. A yard. Neighbors close by. Inside, Gertrude Baniszewski lived with her 7 children. The household was chaotic, overcrowded, and financially desperate. Gertrude had been married twice. Both marriages ended badly. She had a boyfriend, a much younger man named Dennis Lee Wright, who had recently gotten her pregnant and then largely abandoned her. Gertrude was 37 years old. She suffered from chronic asthma. She was exhausted, bitter, and, it would later become clear, profoundly unstable. When Sylvia and Jenny Likens moved in, things were manageable at first. The girls helped around the house. They attended school with Gertrude's children. But when the first payment from Lester was late, something shifted in Gertrude. She beat Sylvia. Not a slap. A sustained beating, with a belt. She told Sylvia it was for embarrassing her, for making her look like a fool in front of her own children. And then she let her children watch. This detail, that Gertrude beat Sylvia in front of her own kids, is one of the most disturbing threads in this entire case. Because what followed was not just one woman's cruelty. It became a group act, a performance, a ritual. Gertrude's children began participating. Her daughter Paula, 17, punched and kicked Sylvia regularly. Another daughter, Stephanie, sometimes joined in, sometimes tried to pull back. Gertrude's sons took turns. And then other neighborhood children started coming to the house, to watch, to participate, to feel the power of it. Gertrude encouraged them. She told them Sylvia was a bad girl, a liar, a prostitute, someone who deserved whatever she got. She was 16 years old. What happened inside that house between July and October 1965 defies easy description, and yet it is important to describe it, because Sylvia Likens deserves to have her story told fully. She deserves witnesses, even now, 60 years later. The abuse escalated in stages. What began as beatings became something far worse. Gertrude began depriving Sylvia of food. While the rest of the household ate, Sylvia was given almost nothing, sometimes forced to eat her own vomit if she became sick from hunger. She was locked in the basement. She was forbidden from using the bathroom, forced to sleep on a bare mattress in her own waste. Gertrude began allowing, and then encouraging, neighborhood children to come to the house and hurt Sylvia. She would set them up with tasks. She turned Sylvia's suffering into a kind of entertainment. Children as young as 10 participated. One of Gertrude's sons, John Baniszewski Jr., burned Sylvia with cigarettes. Others joined in. The burns multiplied across her body. And then came the act that would become the defining detail of this case. The act that the court, the press, and history would not be able to look away from. Gertrude Baniszewski took a hot sewing needle, and she carved words into Sylvia's stomach. The words read, "I am a prostitute and proud of it." Gertrude told Sylvia that she would have to live with those words for the rest of her life. She told the neighborhood children that Sylvia had done it to herself. By this point, Sylvia could barely move. She had lost a tremendous amount of weight. Her body was covered in burns, bruises, and infected wounds. She could not walk unaided, and still, no one called for help. Sylvia Likens did not give up, even in those final weeks, even when her body was failing, when she could barely lift herself from the basement floor. She tried to get word out. She tried to write a letter. She tried to tell people what was happening to her. Did anyone listen? And when Sylvia finally died on October 26, 1965, what did Gertrude Baniszewski do? We'll answer those questions in the next part of this story. And we'll look at what happened when police finally stepped through that front door, and what they found inside. If this case is new to you, I want you to understand something before we continue. What comes next is not easier. It is, in many ways, harder. Because the question that will haunt this story is not just what happened to Sylvia. It's why no one stopped it. Stay with me, because this story matters.
Gertrude had built a careful narrative around her. She told neighbors, teachers, and anyone who asked that Sylvia was a troubled girl, a runaway, a liar. She told people Sylvia had a disease, that her wounds were self-inflicted, that she couldn't be trusted, and people believed her. Or perhaps more accurately, people chose not to look too closely, because looking closely would have required them to act, and acting was uncomfortable. Sylvia did manage to whisper her situation to at least one person, a neighborhood boy named Mike Monroe. She told him what was happening to her. She begged him to get help. Mike Monroe went home and told his mother. His mother did not call the police. Let that sit for a moment. A child told an adult that a girl was being tortured in a nearby house. And the adult did nothing. This is one of the most painful threads in the Sylvia Likens case. Not just what Gertrude did, but the wall of silence that surrounded it. The neighbors who heard sounds from that house and looked away. The teachers who noticed Sylvia had stopped coming to school and filed no report. The children who participated and went home to their dinners and said nothing to their parents. There was one more attempt. In the final weeks of her life, Sylvia managed to write a letter. With what little strength she had left, she wrote a note addressed to her parents. She described what was happening to her. She asked them to come. She told them she loved them. Gertrude found the letter. She read it in front of Sylvia, and then she destroyed it. And then she beat her for writing it. Chapter 5. The final day's tone. Somber, slow, reverential. This is the hardest part. Treat it with care. By mid-October 1965, Sylvia Likens was dying. There is no other way to say it. Her body had endured more than any human body should be asked to endure. The infections from her wounds had spread. She was severely malnourished. She had suffered brain damage from the repeated blows to her head. Gertrude, at this point, appears to have realized that Sylvia was not going to recover. And rather than seek medical help, rather than call an ambulance, Rather than do anything that might have saved the life of the girl she had been entrusted to care for, Gertrude began planning what to do with the body. She told her children and the neighborhood kids that they were going to take Sylvia out to a wooded area and leave her there. They would make it look like she had run away. They had done nothing wrong, she told them. Sylvia had done this to herself. On the evening of October 25, 1965, Gertrude attempted to get Sylvia out of the basement and cleaned up. She wanted to move her before she died. Or perhaps she still believed Sylvia might survive long enough to be disposed of elsewhere. It didn't matter. Sylvia Likens died on the morning of October 26, 1965. She was 16 years old. The official cause of death was brain hemorrhage, caused by the repeated and sustained physical trauma she had suffered over the course of nearly 3 months. She also had malnutrition, shock, internal injuries, over 150 individual wounds documented on her body, 150 on a 16-year-old girl. Gertrude Baniszewski called the police. She told them that Sylvia had been a troubled girl, that she had run away multiple times, that she had come home in this condition, that she, Gertrude, had no idea what had happened to her. She said Sylvia had done it all to herself. Chapter 6. Police arrive. The scene inside the house. Tone, cold and factual here. Let the details speak. No dramatization needed. When Indianapolis Police Department officers arrived at 3850 East New York Street on the morning of October 26, 1965, they were not prepared for what they found. Sylvia's body was in the basement. The officers on scene would later testify that the smell alone told them something was deeply, catastrophically wrong before they even reached her. The wounds on her body were immediately visible. The carved words on her stomach were immediately visible. One of the responding officers later said, and this is a direct quote that has been cited in court documents, that in all his years of police work, he had never seen a human being treated the way Sylvia Likens had been treated. He said it looked like something out of a war. Gertrude Baniszewski maintained her story.
Sylvia had done it to herself, she said.
Sylvia was a bad girl, troubled, a runaway, but the officers weren't buying it. And then, in a moment that would crack the case wide open, one of Gertrude's own children spoke up.
Stephanie Baniszewski, 15 years old, pulled an officer aside, and she told him the truth.
Not all of it, not everything, but enough. Enough for the officers to know that what had happened in that house was not a runaway story, was not self-inflicted, was murder. Gertrude Baniszewski was arrested at the scene. Paula Baniszewski, 17, who had been one of the most active participants in the abuse, was arrested shortly after. John Baniszewski Jr. was arrested, and 3 neighborhood boys who had been regular participants were also taken into custody. In total, 6 people would be charged in connection with the death of Sylvia Likens. The youngest was 12 years old. Chapter 7. The investigation opens. What they discovered. Tone. Methodical. Building outrage beneath a calm surface. As detectives began piecing together what had happened inside that house, the full picture emerged. And it was worse than even the initial scene had suggested. Witness after witness came forward once the arrests were made. Neighborhood children, many of them, admitted they had been inside the house, admitted they had seen what was happening to Sylvia. Some admitted they had participated. Detectives learned about the food deprivation, about the basement imprisonment, about the burns, about the letter Sylvia had tried to send to her parents, the letter Gertrude had destroyed. They learned that Sylvia had, on at least one occasion, managed to get out of the basement briefly and tried to crawl to a neighbor's house. She had been found and dragged back before she could reach anyone. They learned that Jenny Likens, Sylvia's younger sister, who had lived in the house the entire time, had been present for much of what happened. Jenny had not been harmed in the same way. Gertrude seemed to have specifically targeted Sylvia, leaving Jenny largely alone, possibly because Jenny's polio made her seem less threatening, or because harming a visibly disabled child was a line even Gertrude didn't want to cross. But Jenny had witnessed nearly everything, and Jenny was the one who ultimately provided investigators with the most complete picture of what Sylvia had endured. Jenny Likens, 14 years old, sat across from detectives and described in detail what she had watched happen to her sister over the course of 3 months. She had been unable to help her. She had been threatened herself. She had been told that if she said anything, the same would happen to her. But she remembered everything, and she told all of it. Transition. End of batch 2. Tone, measured. Pull the viewer forward into the trial. The arrest of Gertrude Baniszewski and her co-defendants sent shockwaves through Indianapolis, and soon through the entire country. The story made national headlines. People could not comprehend it. How had this happened in a residential neighborhood? How had it gone on for 3 months? How had so many people known, or suspected, and done nothing? Those questions would be asked in a courtroom. Because what came next was one of the most closely watched criminal trials in Indiana history. A trial that raised fundamental questions about culpability, about justice, and about what it means when an entire community looks away while a child suffers. Gertrude Baniszewski was about to face a jury, and the question was not just whether she was guilty. The question was, what do you do with someone capable of this? We'll answer that, and tell you what happened to every single person charged in this case, in our final segment.